Welcome to the deep dive. Today we're exploring something we're calling the consistency hack. At its heart, it's really about our fundamental human drive to, well, maintain consistency in what we think, what we do.
Right, that's a core idea from Dr. Robert Cialdini's work on influence. It explains how even these tiny commitments we make can sort of set us down a path, a commitment hallway, if you will.
Commitment hallway, yeah. Influencing our future actions.
Exactly. It's like this psychological pressure we feel. Once we take that first step, even a small one, we feel this internal and sometimes external need to keep going.
To seem consistent, right, to ourselves and others.
Yeah, and avoid looking, dishonest or flaky. It's uncomfortable.
So our goal in this deep dive is to really understand how this principle, this consistency thing, can be leveraged. We're looking at some fascinating psychological and linguistic techniques.
Right, how we can maybe subtly encourage positive traits.
Exactly. Things like being more focused or more open, building stronger connections. We've got some, frankly, quite compelling research and examples lined up. So let's dive in.
Okay, let's start with the power of those small commitments. It's actually surprising how pertinent just a small initial yes can be.
It really is. And the classic example, I think, is that yard sign study. Maybe we can unpack that one a bit.
Sure. So researchers, they went around and first asked homeowners this really small thing. Would you put this tiny little sticker in your window? Said safe driving.
Okay. Tiny request. Minimal effort.
Minimal commitment. Then, a few weeks later, they went back to those same houses, and this time they asked something much bigger.
Which was?
Would you put this large and apparently quite unattractive sign on your front lawn, also promoting safe driving?
Ah, okay. So the big ask comes later. What happened?
Well, the results were pretty remarkable. The people who had agreed to the tiny sticker first, a significantly higher percentage of them agreed to the big ugly sign later on.
Really? Compared to people who weren't asked about the sticker?
Exactly. Compared to a control group, they just asked about the big sign straight away. Those folks were much less likely to say yes.
Wow. It really makes you think, doesn't it? That little sticker, that was the foot in the door.
It acted as that initial commitment. Saying yes to that small thing created this psychological pull, this need to be consistent when the bigger request came. It sort of opened that hallway.
Yeah, that commitment hallway.
And what's interesting, too, is how it might subtly shift how people see themselves. Like, maybe putting up the sticker made them think, okay, I'm the kind of person who cares about safe driving.
So the later request feels more aligned with this slightly updated self-image.
Precisely. And, this isn't just about window stickers. There's a much heavier example from the Korean War POWs, obviously a very different context, but it shows the principle starkly.
Right. That's a much more serious illustration. Can you walk us through that?
Yeah. The Chinese interrogators, they didn't start with heavy-handed propaganda. They began really small, asking seemingly harmless questions.
Like what?
Things like, is the United States perfect? Questions most people would concede have some nuance.
Okay. Hard to argue the U.S. is perfect. So a prisoner might agree there are some flaws.
Exactly. A tiny concession. Then, maybe they'd be asked to write that small critique down, just for themselves, initially.
Okay.
Yeah.
Still seems minor.
But then the next step might be reading that critique aloud, maybe to a couple of other prisoners. Then perhaps writing slightly longer critiques or discussing them more openly.
So it escalates, small step by small step.
Yes. And these were public commitments, even if just in front of a few others. Over time, making these statements, writing them down, reading them out, it started to shift how some prisoners viewed themselves.
They started to internalize it.
Yeah.
Because they had publicly committed.
That's the idea. To maintain consistency between their actions, making critiques, and their beliefs, some started to align their views more with the anti-American sentiments they were being encouraged to express. It shows how beliefs can be subtly shaped by these incremental public actions.
That's quite unsettling, how those small steps compound.
It really underscores the power of that initial, seemingly tiny commitment.
Okay. So outside of these more extreme examples, how does this show up in everyday life? You mentioned Yelp reviews earlier.
Ah, yes. Online reviews. Think about the process. You decide to write a positive review on Yelp.
Right.
As you're typing, sometimes the platform gives you little prompts like great detail or encourages you. That feels good, right? You're investing time,
You're
effort.
committing to writing this review.
Exactly. That's the small commitment, the time and thought you're putting in.
Yeah.
Then you finish writing your masterpiece, you hit submit, and then maybe Yelp asks you to create an account if you don't have one.
Ah, I see where this is going. You've already done the work.
You've invested. The thought of abandoning that review you just wrote, it feels inconsistent. So signing up, even though it's an extra step, feels like the logical, consistent thing to do to complete the action.
You follow through because of the initial investment. Makes sense. Okay, so we've established how small commitments work. Now, how about leveraging consistency through uh, language itself, this idea of informational altruism? What's that about?
Right, informational altruism. It's basically the idea that if you share something a bit personal or helpful first, if you're altruistic with your information, it can kind of trigger reciprocity in the other person.
So you open up a little, and it encourages them to open up too.
Yeah, it taps into that natural human tendency for give and take, and it leverages consistency because you've set a tone of openness, making it feel, well, consistent for them to respond in kind.
Like the example of sharing a story about a mentor. If I talk about someone who impacted me, maybe you'd feel more comfortable sharing a similar story.
Exactly. It creates that first small step towards a more open, sharing conversation. You're modeling the behavior you hope to see.
Okay. Now, the source also mentioned these 4 rules for consistency-based scripts. These sound a bit more theoretical.
They are a bit more abstract, yeah. Less about specific phrases, more about the structure of communication. Things like using interruption strategically to heighten focus.
Or using a borrowed experience, framing something new so it feels similar to something they've done before, making the desired response feel more predictable, more consistent for them.
Right? Tapping into existing patterns. And then there's automation, leveraging familiar behaviors, things people do almost automatically to prompt a consistent response.
It shows how deep this consistency drive goes. And the last one, transparency. The idea that if you call out the technique, it loses its power.
Yeah, basically. If someone knows you're using a script or a specific technique on them, the magic, the subtle influence kind of disappears. Makes sense.
It does. Okay, so let's get really practical now. How can we actually use this understanding of consistency to encourage those positive traits we mentioned? Openness, focus, connection in our interactions.
Great question. Let's start with openness. There's a technique called the soft compliment.
Soft compliment, how does that work?
It's quite clever, actually. You start by admitting a small vulnerability or struggle of your own before giving the compliment.
Okay, why?
It makes the compliment feel more genuine, less like random flattery. For instance, I used to really struggle with social anxiety, but wow, you're so naturally open. Did you have to learn that, or have you always been this way?
Ah, I see. Admitting your own struggle makes the "you're so open" part land better. And the question reinforces the idea that openness is their quality.
Exactly. It gently encourages them to see themselves as naturally open and maybe act consistently with that. There's also the subtle agreement for openness.
How does that one work?
It's more of a statement, like, it's rare to meet someone so open, so many people seem quite guarded these days.
Okay, so you're praising them while contrasting them with others who are guarded.
Right. Most people want to align with the positive trait, open, and distance themselves from the negative one, guarded. It subtly pressures them to maintain that openness to stay consistent with the positive description.
Makes sense. And then there's encouraging self-reflection. The example was asking something like, one thing I've noticed is that people often fear judgment, which can hold them back. Why do you think that's become so common? How does that promote openness in the person you're asking?
Well, by asking them to analyze why others are closed off due to fear of judgment, you subtly position them as someone who likely doesn't have that same fear.
Ah, because they're reflecting on it from an outside perspective.
Kind of. They're thinking about the problem, which implies they might be different. It implicitly affirms their own presumed openness and confidence, encouraging them to be consistent with that self-view.
That's really subtle. Okay, let's switch gears to focus. How can we use consistency to encourage people, maybe even ourselves, to be more present?
Similar principles, really. Highlighting and affirming the behavior. You could use a direct inquiry like, how is it that you're able to tune everything else out and stay so present? It's such a rare quality.
So you're directly complimenting their focus, framing it as exceptional.
Exactly. You put a spotlight on it. Or you could reinforce focused presence with a statement like, so many people I talk to struggle to stay focused. Meeting someone like you who's so present is really refreshing.
Again, that contrast. You're focused, unlike many others. It makes them want to stay consistent with that positive label.
Precisely. It validates the behavior and adds that gentle pressure to maintain it. And then there's the self-examination of commitment angle.
Which involves asking.
Something like, how did you develop this ability to stay so checked in? Most people would have been distracted by now.
Okay, so asking how they do it encourages them to think about it, to own it.
Yes, by reflecting on how they developed or maintained that focus, they're essentially reinforcing their identity as a focused, committed person. It solidifies that self-perception.
Got it. Okay, one more trait.
Here.
Connection. How do we foster better connection using consistency?
Again, it's about highlighting and affirming those social skills. You might ask something direct. How do you connect so well with people? It's impressive. So many people feel disconnected these days.
Praising their skill and contrasting it with a common problem feeling disconnected. It positions them as skilled.
Right, or you could use an affirmation of connection skills, maybe saying, your approach really puts people at ease. Have you always been like this?
So you're validating their ability to make others comfortable and suggesting it's an inherent trait, something consistent about them.
Exactly. It's all about using language to subtly label and reinforce these desirable traits, making people more inclined to act consistently with that positive label.
This brings us to those positive and negative association techniques. How they fit in, they sound a bit more direct.
They can be, yeah. They work by linking a desired trait with something generally admired, or by distancing an undesirable trait from the person by linking it to something disliked. The core ideas are still trait agreement, group dissociation, and that underlying commitment to consistency.
Okay, let's break that down. Positive association first. We link a good trait with another admired quality.
Right, so the example about art appreciation, that's incredible. People who appreciate art seem to be so genuine and focused on others around them.
So if I appreciate art and I hear that, I might subconsciously want to be more genuine and focused to stay consistent with that positive image of art appreciators.
That's the idea. It's a subtle nudge. Or the luxury example. It's refreshing to meet someone who appreciates the finer things in life. People like that are usually so open to new experiences.
Linking appreciating luxury with being open. If I like nice things, maybe I should be open too.
And the one about charity. What an amazing heart you have. People like you are so connected with others. Linking generosity with being well-connected.
Okay, I get the positive association. How about the negative dissociation ones? These sound trickier.
They work the opposite way, linking a negative trait you want someone to avoid with an unfavorable group or behavior, creating distance.
So the example about laziness. It's amazing how lazy people can never seem to focus on anything important.
Here, laziness is linked to lack of focus on important things. The implication is, you're not lazy, are you? Because they can't focus. Therefore, you should focus. It encourages focus by making laziness seem undesirable in that specific way.
Right. It creates a desire to not be associated with that lazy, unfocused group. What about the one about drivers?
Inconsiderate drivers never seem to let their guard down. They're always so untrusting. It links being inconsiderate behind the wheel with being untrusting.
So it subtly encourages being more considerate, maybe more trusting, by making the opposite seem negative.
Exactly. And the last one. People who brag about not reading always come across as selfish and unwilling to cooperate.
Okay, linking not reading or bragging about it with selfishness and being uncooperative, pushing towards reading and cooperation.
It's fascinating, isn't it, how these associations tap into our desire to be seen positively and avoid negative labels.
Definitely. So just to kind of pull some threads together here, we've talked about several strategies. That soft compliment technique, starting with vulnerability to make praise genuine.
Right, like I struggled with social anxiety, but you're so open.
And encouraging self-reflection, asking questions that prompt someone to align their identity with a positive trait.
Like, why do you think people fear judgment? Implying the listener perhaps doesn't.
So the overall goal seems to be combining these things, small commitments, specific language, these association techniques to gently guide behavior, reinforce those good qualities.
Exactly. It's about understanding that powerful drive for consistency we all have and using that understanding thoughtfully.
It really boils down to knowing how this psychological principle works, both in ourselves and others, and maybe using it constructively.
And that really is the essence of the consistency hack. Being aware of how it shapes us and how we might consciously use it, hopefully for positive ends.
So maybe something for you listening to think about. Can you recall a time when a small commitment you made, maybe almost without thinking, led to a bigger change? A shift in your behavior, maybe even your beliefs?
Yeah, how did that consistency principle play out for you then?
And looking forward, what's one small intentional commitment you could make, maybe even today, that could nudge you towards a goal you have? Definitely some food for thought there.